Good afternoon. Welcome to Bell Harbor. My name is Tom Norwalk with Visit Seattle. Welcome to our Partner Connect, a very timely candidate forum, and we really appreciate everybody taking time on a gorgeous day to come down to the waterfront. I want to start really and thank our sponsors, Bell Harbor International Conference Center, Uber, and Drive Forward Seattle. Thank you for making this possible, along with Visit Seattle. Also want to just remind people, Bell Harbor recently has gone through a great renovation, added about 20,000 square feet of space. If you would like to take a look after the event later this afternoon, please come back out to the registration area and there'll be some sales team there to give you a tour. It's worth seeing and great new space to our waterfront. We're also fortunate today to have a number of our industry partners that are helping us put this forum on. The Downtown Seattle Association, the Seattle Hotel Association, Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, Seattle Restaurant Alliance, and the Washington Hospitality Association. Great organizations that play a major role in travel and tourism around our city and around our region. Just some quick breaking news on business. We did receive today the July performance results for Seattle, measurements of our hotel occupancy. We measure ourselves, as many of you know, against 14 different cities around the country. And for the month of July, Seattle finished downtown hotels, and this is about 60 hotels, 13,000 rooms. We finished at 92% occupancy, which was the highest percentage of anyone in our competitive set. And I think what's even greater news is that year to date, through July, Seattle is #1 in demand performance. So we are outpacing cities like San Francisco, San Diego, Boston, Denver, Austin, Nashville, great destinations around our country. And I think it sets the stage for why today the forum and the election this fall are even more important. We're at a critical crossroads in the city. Travel and tourism, as we've said many times, it's a very fragile industry. It can change. And what's needed for that is certainly not only economic good health and vibrancy in the city, which we have and we're so fortunate to have, but it also takes political leadership and industry leadership, and we can't do it alone. So to get things going without wasting time, I'm happy to introduce today's moderator. He is Seattle's reassuring voice, Dave Ross. Dave is a host of Seattle's Morning News on KIRO FM. He also provides political commentary, as many of you know, on the CBS radio network. Most importantly, in Dave's almost 40 years with KIRO, I think he has covered and seen everything. I was going to say almost everything. The last few days have been a little unusual nationally, but he's covered just about everything. So please welcome Dave Ross.
Thank you. Thank you. Congratulations on the occupancy rate, and I think it's clear that it's due to Tom's endless summer initiative, 55 days of sunshine and an eclipse. So how can you go wrong with that? The stats on the tourism, and that's what we're going to focus on, of course, initially, but everything is fair game. 38.9 million annual visitors they spend. That's the population of California. 7 billion spent here. Tax revenues, 718 million, and 74,000 plus jobs. And 80% of the businesses that are benefited by this are smaller businesses, sometimes only a few employees. And that's part of the focus of this as well. We're grateful for the candidates to the candidates for coming, and I want to invite the two candidates now for mayor to the stage. Jenny Durkin, an attorney who has championed civil rights, was appointed to be U.S. Attorney by President Obama, worked on police reform, comes from Issaquah, has been a basketball coach, also a baggage handler up in Alaska.
Don't mess me with Dave.
I know. Won the 2004 recount, an election I'm very familiar with. Assisted travelers stranded by the first Trump travel order. Welcome. Carrie Moon is an engineer and civic leader, worked at the U.S. Department of Labor, co-founded and directed the People's Waterfront Coalition for a highway-free waterfront and transit alternatives. Part of that is happening. The viaduct is actually going to come down and is deeply into economics and fair housing. So welcome to you both, and we'll begin with opening remarks, and these should be 3-minute answers. The timer is right down here. First of all, and I'll start with you, Jenny, why do you want to be mayor of Seattle? And if elected, how would the tourism figure into your plans?
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for the question. Thanks to everyone who is here today on this beautiful day, coming into a room with no windows, so you can't see that sunshine. My first promise to the tourism industry, if I am mayor, every day will be like this. We will have eclipse every year, and there'll be no smoke. But seriously, I am very honored to be here with Carrie Moon on this stage and be one of the two candidates that people have to choose from to be mayor. I want to be mayor of Seattle because I love this city. I was born here, my mother was born and raised here, and it's the city where I've raised my two sons. And I think it is a fabulous city. It is one of the best cities on the globe, in my opinion. But we have grown so rapidly, and we've had such economic prosperity that we're really in danger of becoming two Seattles. The homeless situation is, in my view, both unacceptable and heartbreaking, and we have to do better. I also believe that Seattle is becoming almost an unaffordable city. People can't afford to live here anymore. With rising property taxes, even those who've had a home for years can't afford to stay in them. We must do better and address those challenges immediately. Those are urgent crises: homelessness, affordability, and transportation, which you all know. I believe that affects our fabric as a city. And I have said it before, and I will say it again, I really don't believe this election is about who will be mayor for the next 4 years. Because we all have seen mayors come and go. In the last 3 elections, we've had 3 different mayors. What we really have to focus on is, what will Seattle be like for the next generation? What is the city we want to build for the next generation? Because we are at that crossroads where I believe the decisions we make today will be building that city. Will we be the open, inclusive city that has built a good transportation system with vibrant neighborhoods around those transportation systems that's inclusive, where people can afford to live in the city, where we still have a very vibrant tourism city? If you look at those numbers that Dave just told us, it's phenomenal. You know, people come to Seattle for the same reason I'm running. They love Seattle. It is a great city. It is a welcoming city. But if we want to keep having people come, we have to make very intentional choices about the fabric of our city, the livability of our city, and what we'll be like in the future. So that's why I'm running for mayor. I look forward to some of the specific questions and look forward to the questions from the audience. Thank you.
Carrie Moon, why do you want to be mayor, and how would tourism figure in it?
It is great to be here. Thank you so much for coming out. I love this city more than anyone, and then I remember a room full of people like this who are here on a sunny day probably love this city just as much as I do. I am running for mayor because I believe so fiercely in Seattle's potential. We have this booming economy. We have a spirit of innovation and entrepreneurship. We have shared progressive values like probably no other city in the world. But we have a problem with our economy. It's not providing prosperity to everyone. And we need to work together to build an economy that builds prosperity for everyone. And I am really looking forward to working in partnership with business, with organizations, with small businesses especially, to figure out how to develop an economic development strategy that protects small businesses and expands small businesses, that brings access to entrepreneurship for everyone, and that really takes care of our city. Because as we learned, or as we all know, $7 billion worth of revenue from tourism is a really important part of our economy. So we have to make sure that our city is working for small businesses, for the people that live here, and for the people who visit. So I want to introduce myself a little bit more because I'm a newcomer to politics. I grew up in a small business family. My father got a loan in 1972 to buy a failing business that had 1 employee left, and we built it into a business of 120 people that shared profits broadly. We paid at least 50%, usually more than prevailing wage. We shared ownership with all the employees, and we were deeply committed to being the most innovative and high quality of life workplace we could. And we won the award for being the best place to work in the state of Michigan because of this commitment to innovation and inclusion and profit sharing. When I came to Seattle after I was finished with my engineering degree and or my engineering career and wanted to be a city planner, I've worked in civic advocacy in Seattle for 20 years. I spent 12 years working on the plan for the waterfront and building the vision and the public will and a strong, broad coalition across dozens of organizations and thousands of people at this point to build this great waterfront that's probably going to be the most stunning transformation of our civic public space that we've seen in our generation. So I'm running for mayor because I really want to work on building the best possible future Seattle we can together with business, with labor, with partners across all the many civic advocacy organizations in this city, because I think we all see the potential, we all see what we can be with our tremendous, abundant resources, and we all want to be the city that achieves this new standard of what a city committed to the well-being of everyone, that takes care of all the folks who live here and builds prosperity for everyone, can be in this time of Trump.
So, Carrie, let's keep it with you then. Give me three things, three priorities that would actually help you carry that out and address the feelings among members of the business community who feel alienated by the past two administrations.
So I think the last two administrations were really focused on how do we run this city with political power, and how do we get stakeholders and special interests fighting for their own interest against each other, and the mayor's office basically organized the power struggles without having a vision, without building a path to get to a better future vision. And that's what I would do differently. I would assemble a great structure of leadership in the mayor's office and all the departments, systems of collaboration and communication, a bold vision, a strong action plan, hire fantastic leaders in the mayor's office with me so that we can really execute on a vision. So I think it would be different to have a mission-driven organization in the mayor's office than a politics-driven organization in the mayor's office.
Okay, and Jenny, same question for you. Three things that you do, and how do you look at the way the last two administrations treated the business community?
I think that if you look at my campaign, it will tell you the kind of mayor I will be. I have already built a coalition of both business and labor. I was very pleased last night to get the sole endorsement from the King County Labor Council, which represents most of the labor organizations in the area, working people. And I think that if you want to be mayor, you have to understand that you are going to be facing very tough challenges. There's over 10,000 employees, a $5 billion budget, and I've had experience in government and running an office. When I was United States Attorney, our jurisdiction went from the Canadian border to the Oregon border, everything west of the Cascades. I had to work with big cities and small cities. And what you learn is to tackle the really tough issues like we have, homelessness, affordability, transportation, you have to be someone who can bring people together, diverse interests around the table, and really forge those solutions moving forward. And that's the kind of mayor I will be.
Bringing people together, so both of you have talked about that, but are there certain philosophies that guide you? For example, one of the things we talk about a lot is economic justice. Let's talk about that for just a minute or so. Jenny, what about that?
Absolutely. I have always been guided by social justice and inclusion. My whole career has been devoted to those principles. I started out as a criminal defense lawyer. I worked to establish one of the first drug courts so people could be diverted away from the criminal justice system and get treatment. As U.S. Attorney, I set up a civil rights department. And a perfect example of working with those different interests is when I spearheaded police reform in the Seattle Police Department. It was a very tough issue, and we had to do outreach to all sorts of civil rights organizations and bring them in and listen to them. At the same time, we had to listen to businesses and to the police organizations and city government and leadership. Get all those people to give input, because really, you cannot have government from the top down. You have to listen to people, you have to learn what they need and what the problems are, and then you have to forge solutions and go forward. Seattle is very good on process, but we're not always good on making decisions. And I think that's what you have to do as a leader and a mayor, is move that process forward, include people's voices, include their vision, let them tell you what the problems are, but then have a process to solve those problems.
And Carrie, you've been very outspoken in economic justice. That's sort of your thing. And that phrase sometimes worries business people. So address that, please.
I think we all believe that we can have an economy that builds prosperity for everyone. Our businesses in Seattle have heart. We do so many things to establish pathways for the disadvantaged in our city, from Starbucks barista training program for homeless youth, to all the work people do with Goodwill, to the work people do with the Millionaires Club and Fair Start. businesses in this city have heart. So I know we care about building an economy that works for everyone, but I think we've kind of abandoned our public responsibility to helping guide that economy. For instance, we don't really have a significant economic development strategy in this city focused on expanding, protecting, and nurturing our small business base. We all know that small businesses are the backbone of an economy that works for everyone, that builds wealth, that circulates in community, that keeps wealth in our city. We all talk about it as one of the great features of the American dream, but what are we actually doing to protect, nurture, and support small businesses in our city? Not that much. We need to be doing a lot more to help small businesses deal with the regulations that we've put in place in the past 7 years, to help them get access to capital, to help low-income and minority people get access to entrepreneurship. There's a lot more we could be doing proactively to create the kind of family wage, stable, and sustainable jobs that local businesses create. And I could go on, there's a whole bunch of other items in that list, but I think we need to have a really proactive, strong economic development strategy about keeping wealth here locally in community.
Specific question that affects a lot of people in this room. Do you support constructing the additional convention facility downtown as proposed by the State Convention Center? Carrie.
Definitely. As Nicole Grant had told me once, it's free money. Why would we turn it down? But really, the hotel-motel tax is invested in one of the best economic generators in our city. We bring business in from outside. Those people spend money locally at our hotels and restaurants and in Pike Place Market and all the other businesses downtown. It's a great economic generator. It builds wealth. It sustains wealth in community. I'm in favor of it. I think there's that much additional convention center business out there. We need to bring it to Seattle.
Jenny?
Absolutely. I think we have to build a convention center, but I think the mayor is going to have a strong conversation with the convention center folks, and we're really going to have to plan around the traffic impacts while it's being constructed. As everyone knows, downtown Seattle is going to have a number of projects coming online. The transportation, I'll call it a nightmare that we have now, unfortunately may only get worse. And so we really, as we build that convention center, two things we have to be very mindful of is, number one, what is our transportation plan while we're building it, and how do we phase things appropriately? And the second thing is, as we're building a convention center, are we getting the public benefits that we need from that? It's under negotiation. I think we're in really good shape to do that, Dave. But I think that convention center will help add to the already very robust and vital tourism industry we have.
Do you think that'll involve closing lanes? I had a feeling that would. All right, homelessness. That's, of course, risen to the top of the agenda. Staying with you, Jenny, how do you feel about the Pathways Home initiative, and are there any other solutions that you would examine as mayor?
I just spent this morning talking to people at United Way, how the works they're doing around Pathways Home. Spent yesterday with Plymouth Housing, and have spent parts of every week since announcing for mayor with people either providing the services to the homeless or constructing it. I believe the Pathways Home is the blueprint we should use for now. We need to see, though, how it's being implemented. We have taken a one-size-fits-all solution to homeless serviceness that I think we need to re-examine as a city. So as mayor, I would do a couple of things. First, right now we are rebidding the contracts for homeless services. I think we have to really look at outcomes. As hard as it is, Seattle as a city was built for the 70s, 80s, and 90s. We suddenly are a big city, not a small or big town. And so everything is struggling. Our infrastructure, transportation infrastructure is struggling. Our social service infrastructure is struggling. And so we need to re-examine how we provide services to the homeless. So we need, for example, low barrier shelters so more people can go into shelters with families. They can leave their belongings there. We need to have a continuum of short-term shelter, but we also need the long-term shelter permanent solutions. So I think the Pathways Home is a good blueprint, but as we go along the way, we have to be very conscious about how it's being implemented, whether there's unintended consequences. We've seen every time government acts, there's always unintended consequences. And looking at those, observing them, and figuring out how to dial it back, where to dial it back, what to change. But we have to act urgently. There's too many people living on the streets. We need to move people from the tents, the doorways, the cars, and we need them to move into permanent shelter. And we have to realize the people on the streets sometimes have very different stories from one another. And while they're there is very different reasons. So the women living in the cars with their children or the people living in vehicles may require a very different solution than the people who are living in the tents and are addicted to opioids. And so we have to really address our solutions to the reality on the ground.
Okay, Pathways Home on the right track, or would you do something different?
You know, I think when we see the increase in homelessness, our hearts are all broken, because that is not who we are in this city. Whether you're homeless yourself, whether you're a downtown worker, or whether you're a visitor, you deserve to be safe and to feel safe. So it's absolutely an urgent crisis that we have to face. I'm going to have to disagree with Jenny. I think the Pathways Home report is really just about 1/3 right. Yes, we need more efficiency in the system, but that's really just nibbling around the edges. What we really need is to strike this problem at its root. In that report, it said the housing affordability crisis and the homelessness crisis are completely separate and should be dealt with separately. And I think that's just foolish. I think the number one reason people are homeless is because our housing is unaffordable. So we have to put in solutions to the housing affordability crisis, which I'm sure I'll talk about later. But we also have to look at the lack of funding in addiction services, in mental health services, in behavioral health services. These folks need help. They need more than just a roof over their head. They need help getting back on their feet. So I think we need to invest in those kind of services. We need to invest in low barrier shelters, as Jenny said. We need to look at all the emergency ways we can get, short-term ways we can get people out of the tents and off the sidewalks into more secure housing, like tiny house villages, like the RV program that is still being refined. I think there's a really good model there. So we need both the emergency short-term, we need low barrier shelters, and then we need more long-term supportive housing, because a lot of these folks honestly are never going to be able to support themselves in market rate housing that in Seattle. So we're going to need to set up better funding and better facilities for long-term supportive housing for the people who need a lot of help for the rest of their lives.
So just to get a better feel for that, you're saying the market is not going to work, and I hear you saying it's probably never going to work for a certain segment of the population?
Yeah, I think one of the things in the Pathways Home report is that we should use housing vouchers for rapid rehousing. And so that might work for a few people, like people at a temporary setback and just need a few months to get back on their feet, get a new job, get back on track. But for most people, 6 months of housing voucher is not enough to get them back on their feet. If you're earning $15 an hour, you're never going to be able to afford a $3,000 apartment. It just doesn't work.
But does that mean the city builds public housing? Does it build special dormitories? Do you have anything? People want to know what downtown's going to look like, and will this be part of that?
The housing affordability crisis is affecting more and more. Even what used to be middle-class people cannot afford housing anymore. So we need to do 3 things. We need to stop the speculation that's part of driving up our housing prices. We need to invest a lot more money via the Housing Trust Fund, via the housing levy at the city level, via other avenues we can get revenue in building affordable housing in the nonprofit sector and on publicly owned land too. And we also need to look at all the models for multifamily low-rise that we could be building in neighborhoods, but because of the land use code, it simply doesn't work. So things like duplexes and row houses and backyard cottages and congregate housing, all those things are basically impossible to build in our city right now, but they're all really good solutions that the free market can provide as affordable housing.
Jen, do you want to comment on some of those ideas?
Yeah, I think first of all we have to separate out how we deal with the homeless today, and then be very realistic that we've not done a good job. And we have disagreed a little bit in terms of, for example, what do we do about illegal encampments? I think that allowing people to continue to live in tents and illegal encampments is immoral for a number of reasons. But the question is not should they, the question is what are the solutions? We do not have enough solutions today. We need more short-term shelter, and then we need permanent housing. And if we are not realistic about the people who are living on the streets, which is that a huge number of those people have mental health problems and are addicted to opiates, often heroin or crack cocaine. So we need to have today a strategy to get those people the mental health treatment that they need, the addiction treatment that they need, and it has to be a continual process. Right now, most of those services, the addiction and mental health services dollars flow through King County, while the shelter dollars go through the city. That's inefficient and it's not holistic. So we need to combine those systems. We need to have a regional approach to both homelessness and affordability, because there is no question that the affordability question is linked to homelessness, both because it is difficult to move people into homes because we can't afford permanent situations, but also there's so many people who are just one layoff away from themselves becoming homeless because rents are becoming so expensive. So we need to have a very robust, immediate strategy on how to get people into homes, but also how to create more affordable housing.
Should these facilities be isolated from places that tend to host a lot of tourists?
I think that I just disagree with the premise of that, Dave. First of all, they're not facilities. Ideally, what we want are homes for people. And if we deal from a point of respect and compassion with homeless people, as I think we should, and we get solutions and places for them to live on both a short-term basis and a long-term basis, then they should be in every community we have, because they are our brothers and our sisters. The problem is we have not had that strategy, and so what we have now is a variety of illegal and legal encampments, tents pitched every place, people living indoors in cars, and a number of shelters that are frankly outdated because they're the type of shelters that were for a different type of society, where you check in at 5 p.m., you maybe say a prayer, you have your chow, you get a bunk, and then you're back on the street. That's not a solution. So I reject that somehow we need to create solutions that hide people. It's not about hiding people or keeping them from tourists. It's about integrating them into our very lives, and I think we can do better at that.
Carrie, you want to reflect on that issue?
Yeah, I agree. Yes, if we do this well, we used to have a lot of SROs in downtown Seattle. And we have a lot of shelters that are integrated into communities. We have a lot of low-income housing and very low-income housing projects that are integrated into communities. If we do it well, if we build good facilities and manage them well, I welcome them into all of our communities because it's something we can be proud of. If you've ever visited a tiny house village, I think you'll know what I mean. They're kind of charming. I mean, it's a short-term solution for people just getting back on their feet, but they have security. They have the facilities they need to live dignified, safe, secure lives. They have self-governance models where they cook together and they eat together and they make rules together. They take care of one another. It's a very healthy way for people who are experiencing homelessness to make that first step towards getting back on their feet. So I think there's a lot of positive models, and if we all work together, I think we can figure out how to welcome them into our communities and help people get back on their feet.
Can I just add one thing to that,
Yeah.
Dave? I think the thing that we have seen in Seattle is we have too much density of social services in certain parts of the city. And that has evolved over time. And I think that we need to be more strategic and proactive about moving social services throughout the neighborhood so that people can live in all parts of our city.
Let's talk about police. That helps make people feel secure too, especially visitors. And you've worked on police reform. Has it been a success? And as mayor, what else would you do?
The issue of police in our city is one that we have worked on for decades. I was involved over the years trying to make the police system more fair and more responsible to the citizens. 3 different mayors appointed me to 3 different Seattle Police Department oversight boards. And so when I was U.S. Attorney and the civil rights groups came to me, and we saw video after video of usually people of color being abused by the police, we knew we had to act. And again, I knew mayors come and go, police chiefs come and go. We needed durable reform. And we needed reform that would last beyond any mayor, which is why I insisted on us getting a federal judge consent decree in place. At the same time, in building those reforms, we have to make sure that it really works for the police officers to be able to do their job. And so while we're building reform, I personally not only met with civil rights groups, with communities, with city leaders, but I met with police officers, cops on the beat, to make sure that what we were doing could improve how they did their jobs. When we did our investigation, we looked at 18 months worth of data on every time a police officer used his force in the city of Seattle for that period of time. And we found 2 facts that I think were very important. The first one is, and most people didn't understand this, is most police officers in that period of time never used force at all. Most police officers never used force at all. Second, 70% of the time that police used force in that period of time, they used it against someone who is either in mental health crisis or under the influence of drugs and alcohol. 70% of the time. So I insisted that the number one prong of our police reform be better crisis intervention and de-escalation training. And Seattle Police Department completely changed how it does de-escalation. We worked with Sue Rohr at the Criminal Justice Training Center to make sure as we made our changes, police departments across the state could make similar changes so that we would really be a community police model. An unfortunate thing is the first 3-year report was filed the same day that the mayor's lawsuit was filed. And so it got lost, but the federal monitor and judge found that in the 3 years since we instituted reforms, serious uses of force have dropped over 60%. 60%. And when we did our investigation, 70% of the time, police officers were using force against people in mental health crisis. That has dropped to, I think, 12 or 13% of the time, and usually it's the lowest level of force. The difference is now we have mental health people involved in both the training and writing the procedures. There's a crisis intervention committee, so every time force is used, it comes back to that committee to say, is our training right? Is our policy right? How do we get it better? We have made great improvements. We have to do better. If you look at the death of Charlene Lyles, we know we have to do better. But reform is never something that you get there and you stop. Reform means you constantly have a feedback loop and you improve. And if you look at it today, the reason we know about what happened with Charlene Lyles is because of reforms. The way the investigation was done, all of that is because of reform. So it's better, but as mayor, we're going to keep pushing it to make sure we continue to get better.
Carry on police reform.
So there's a lot to do in police reform in our city. We all know that the police spend way too much of their time on 911 calls and dealing with people in crisis. And this prevents them from being out in community, doing the proactive work, establishing trust, establishing relationships with folks, and being a proactive, positive part of communities, helping prevent crime, helping identify hot spots, helping identify youth at risk and help them get the help they need. So we have sort of this downward spiral of crisis in the police department. As Jenny talked about, we also have a deep, lasting problem with bias in policing, with a racist society where the police are basically the face of enforcement of a racist society, and we have to keep working on that problem within the police department, but also within city government and within our society. So we need de-escalation training, we need anti-bias training, we need alternatives to use of force training, and we need crisis intervention training. We need our police officers to be experts in all those things if they're going to be a productive, constructive part of our communities. But I think this is beyond just police reform, it's also criminal justice reform. We have a criminal justice system that is way too harsh on youth of color, and we need to establish much more funding and resources for all these alternatives to incarceration for youth. So that means restorative justice and all the mentorship programs to help youth who are getting off on the wrong track, help bring them back towards a productive, healthy life in society. So we need to be investing in those services too, and those programs. And we need to also be doing more with the Community Police Commission. You know, the police officers have an idea about what they think is fair and what they think is right and what they think is appropriate for what they do when they feel afraid. But we need our citizen oversight to make sure we are kind of watching over the police and we are pointing out, hey, that didn't go so well, let's fix that. Because it's not going to be a problem that's solved just inside the police department. We need community oversight with expertise and some ability to help keep moving the process forward. So there's still a lot more work to do with police reform and with criminal justice reform. And as mayor, this would be a top priority because I think, you know, the racial tension in our city that's happening right now is largely centered here, and we need to keep working on it together.
Okay, you filled out some cards on the way in. David, you have a few of those questions?
Okay, can you hear me now? questions from the audience filled out during registration and immediately before this event. Candidates, question number 1. What action will you take in homeless camps where fires have been set and residential and commercial properties are in danger of being destroyed?
Jenny, go ahead.
Again, the issue of homelessness is one that is heartbreaking for all of us, and one that is not fair to the people living on the streets. And some of the things that you mentioned, the fires, the destruction to property, are, I think, a result of us not doing what we need to do as a city. And so let's talk about, for example, unauthorized encampments, which I think your question is about unauthorized encampments, not the authorized ones. Unauthorized encampments, you know, in the first 6 months of this year, the city spent over $6 million, a little over $1 million a month, hauling garbage out of encampments. The people, the city workers who go into encampments to do the outreach are paid extra money called encampment pay because it is deemed a dangerous situation. And yet we allow people to live in these places where there are tons of garbage, where it is dangerous, where there's been human trafficking, where there are needles, human waste, feces, and rats, and I think that is deplorable. And so I think when we look at these property damage and fires, they are the indication of something, a much greater problem, which is us as a society which has failed to have real solutions for people. So I continue to believe that we need to humanely continue to relocate people from illegal encampments to other solutions. Right now, the city's policy, they have not done it perfectly. The first times they did it, they were not careful with letting people keep their property. They were not treating humanely. But now they spend a lot of time, the outreach workers, they don't move anyone unless they have a place for them to go to. I think we need to keep doing that because it's easier to give them services. It puts them in a place that's more safe, and it gives us the ability to eventually get them in a home.
Okay, Carrie?
So we need to build a lot more low barrier shelters and sanctioned encampments, whether tent or tiny house villages or RV parks as described in the Road to Housing pilot project that was done a few years ago. We need to be investing in these resources and provide the facilities for folks to come inside where they're going to be safe, have access to sanitation, have access to garbage pickup and clean water and showers. We absolutely have to do that. And I think we all agree as a society that it's unconscionable what we've let happen on our watch. And I, as mayor, would work together to identify sites, funding, strategies, lay out the action plan, and invite everybody who wants to be part of the solution to be part of the solution. If you're part of a church that has some land, let's talk. If you have property you're not using, let's talk. If there's vacant city-owned land or public-owned land in your neighborhood, let's talk, because we need to develop community-based emergency housing for folks if we're going to bring them inside from these unsafe places where, you're right, they're a risk to themselves and they're a risk to the rest of us. But we've got to provide a place for them to go before we sweep them.
Okay, short answer. The current proposed RV legislation, which would suspend the parking rules for people who are living in their RVs, you support that or not?
I think it's a work in progress. It's not done yet. I think the idea that folks in their RV, which 40% of homeless folks are living in a vehicle, so this is their last chance at shelter before they're out on the street. So we have to do what we can to make sure that these work. So asking folks to join a program where they agree to follow certain rules. They'll still stay in the same commercial and industrial zone land that they're allowed to stay in now. And if they do anything illegal, they'll still be allowed to be, given a ticket or towed. But for folks who are following the rules and their only crime is that they can't afford to move their RV, I think that we should provide them a chance to stay where they are and try out the program. But it's not fully developed yet. I think Mike O'Brien released a draft for review and input, and I think there's a lot to be tweaked and improved about it, but I think it's the right track.
Jenny, on the RV law?
Again, our goal has to be to move people out of tents, cars, RVs, doorways, into shelter and home. And so not following that path, I think, is the wrong direction. We don't want to criminalize being homeless. nor do we want people to lose their last position, the cars and vehicles that they have. But it is the wrong direction, in my view, to simply say, well, then let's let them park anywhere for as long as they want. We really have to have a system to bring those people into shelters and into homes. And if they are spread over the city, the other thing that makes it very difficult to do is render the services that people need. We need to be able to provide a whole range of services to people. And we can't do that unless we bring people into the system as best we can. So we have to do it humanely, and we not have to criminalize it.
Okay, another question from the audience. David.
And unfortunately, our final question for this segment. Switching gears a little bit, Major League sports, such as the Super Bowl, baseball's All-Star Game, soccer's World Cup, are important and significant sources of tourism and result in positive economic impact to the city and to businesses. However, attracting these events requires significant commitment from local governments, including the areas of security, transportation, financial commitments. If elected, are you prepared to support any or all of these events to extend necessary resources and attract them to our city?
Carrie, would you take that first, please?
I think I would need to be convinced. I've heard, you're right, they cost a lot. They put a lot of a burden on the city. And with the traffic problems we have now, with the lack of affordable housing we have now, with the very low vacancy rates in our hotels we have now, we're losing apartments to Airbnb every day. I think we have to be really careful about inviting that kind of event to our city. So I would have to be convinced and look at sort of the best practices, what cities have done it well, how is it possible to solve some of these challenges, and unless I'm convinced that it's possible to solve the challenges, I would be really dubious.
And Jenny.
Seattle is a world-class city, and we can host world-class events. I think we have to be careful of costs and look at the transportation challenges, and we have to make sure that the business community and those that would profit by those games are bearing their fair share. But for example, we're going to have the Special Olympics here. That's fantastic. I want to have a World Series All-Star game here. When we get the Sonics back, I want to have that All-Star game and the playoffs here. So I think we can do it. We have to be careful. We have to be smart. We can't get diverted on the real needs of the city, and those come first. But I think we can do both things.
I want to thank our candidates for mayor, Jenny Durkin, Carrie Moon. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Carrie. The candidates for city attorney